If you were to offer one piece of advice to a CISO who was, and presumably this varies from organisation to organisation, but was desperately trying to get heard at board level, was really trying to get it top of the agenda, maybe felt that it wasn't quite getting the airtime that it deserved, what would your one piece of advice be to that CISO?
Speak their language. You ultimately you have to talk finance. That's what they understand. You see, the thing is, most businessmen, business people, there's one thing that's absolutely paramount, and that's the customer. Because without customers, they can't supply their products, they can't supply their services. So if you talk to the board about the customer, protecting the customer, the integrity of that trust relationship that you have with that customer, because without them, that's what drives revenue. So it doesn't matter what you're supplying or what you're delivering, whether that's software, whether that's systems, whether that's whatever it is, products. You've got to talk to the board, and you've got to talk to those senior board members about the stuff that really hurts them or makes them really sit up, and that is about how can we drive more customers to this, how can we get better insights from the data that we've got, how can we do that in a legal and ethical way, how can we make sure that we safeguard and protect our customers' identities and so on and so forth. So just don't talk geek. That's the worst thing you can do. Yes, it's a lot to do with risk as well, to talk about how you articulate the risk. But actually, it's about money, and it's about customers, and making sure that your board understand that you're on that side, you're on the same side as them. That keeps you in business, that keeps you employed. That would be my advice.
Obviously, you've worked in a number of different large organisations in the last few years. Are you finding that you're encountering, exactly the same challenges in each one, or are they all very distinct based on that particular organisation?
It's more of the same. There are nuances that are slightly different for each organisation because of the risk profile or the amount of business or the type of business that they're doing. A great example would be e-com, where it's heavily online. But every organisation all suffers from the same level of risk, but just in varying degrees. So the same controls, the same approach still needs to be applied. It's just a lot smaller in scale, and obviously the impact is a lot higher depending on the brand, the organisation. So, but it's the same challenges irrespective of organisation. You could be a 10-man startup, but you have in fintech, and the level of the data that you're holding or you're transferring on behalf of clients is hugely valuable to criminals. Likewise, you could be a 90,000 employee organisation, and you've got lots of customer data, which makes you a target. So both are targets, both are vulnerable to the same suite of challenges and problems.
Presumably, to some degree, smaller organisations might be more, able to be more agile, more nimble in addressing some of those challenges. Is it? Do you find that it's harder or easier with the kind of smaller organisations?
No. In fact, it's harder because the scale of the challenge, So for a large organisation, they're going to have the resources, the capability, and the budget. For a smaller organisation, they've got exactly the same risks, threat profile, but with smaller budgets, smaller amount of resources, and a finite amount of time. So it's actually harder, I think, for the smaller the organisation. And ironically, I think it's what 1 in 10 organisations are categorised as small to medium-sized enterprises, about 5 million in the UK alone. And so 90% of those are all small organisations, all suffering from the same risks that these large organisations, but without the resource and the capital to actually put, into thwarting or to stopping the damage occurring.
Do you think sometimes among those small organisations there can be a tendency to, I don't want to describe it as complacency, but a tendency to think it's more likely to hit the really, really big organisations, and the implications would be bigger for a large organisation, whereas a small company, is maybe more likely to kind of creep under the radar, less likely to attract attention from potential criminals, etc. Can there be an element of that?
Yeah, I think, there's a level of obscurity just by the sheer fact that not many people know your organisation or know what kind of data you're capturing or, whether you're handling. The old, where I used to work at, John Lewis, we had multiple, tens of different small third-party organisations doing some very finite but sensitive, specialised data analysis. For that, they had to take vast quantities of data from us and take that off and do their data analytics on it. And there's the risk. But you're right. Not many people would know that. So the criminals go after the large organisations because they're easy, soft targets as they see them. But in actual fact, it's the smaller organisations that are more vulnerable because of the points we made before.
So your advice to criminals would be to go for the smaller organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. if I was criminal, I'd be targeting the third parties. I'd be going for the man in the middle.
How important is the really kind of senior leadership? So how significant, for example, might a CEO be in all of this stuff? So particularly, I suspect when there's change involved, so maybe a new CEO comes in, how significant are the decisions that they take or the level of interest that they take in cybersecurity in all of the good stuff that you're trying to do?
Well, I would like to say critical, but it's not really. And the reason why is because at the end of the day, it's important to have the board's commitment to, because but if you're in a small organisation, the MD might be the chairman, might be the COO, might be the CFO. So in a small organisation, it's very different. It's very hands-on. I think the challenge, if you like, is more geared towards how good the person is, that the CISO or head of information security or head of security, whatever you call them. I think it's more about the quality of the individual that you've got in there, and it's sort of incumbent on them to do the best job. Now, fortunately for our sector, we've got some really good people out there that are doing a really good, diligent job, whom aren't on the board but are making a massive difference to changing that organisation's ability to defend itself or recover from a serious attacks or denial of service or whatever the issue may be. So I think it is important to have someone at the board making sure that you've got the sponsorship and the seniority behind you, but actually it's that CISO. That's the crucial role. That's the critical part. That if he or she is good or good enough to really take it to heart as to what they do and how they do it, and then that's going to make the difference.
How does cybersecurity fit within broader digital transformation programs? And can there sometimes be a conflict there? Because on the one hand, you might have, one group of people trying to do something new and generate new revenue streams and, develop the customer experience in different ways. On the other hand, you have other people perhaps more focused on the things that might go wrong as a consequence of those decisions. And how can those two things be reconciled?
Well, it's tricky. It's not easy, because every CISO, every peer that I know will always talk about, nowadays, will talk about how they drive, value through what they do. But at the end of the day, being a CISO is an insurance policy, because what you're trying to do is prevent something from happening. And then obviously if it does happen, to minimise the impact of that. And therefore you're a cost to the business. And so being able to justify your existence and why you need budgets for this latest software or, defensible position, that's difficult to sell. unless you can really leverage the transformation ideas that they're trying to do. If they're trying to get better insights, or if they're trying to do different things with the same data set, then you can sort of leverage that initiative to then make sure that you've put the adequate controls in, the safeguards, etc. But it's not easy, and there is a natural conflict. And that's okay, because that's why you need, depending on the size of your organisation, you need sort of business-facing security consultants, for want of a better word, that are working with the business, understand what they're trying to, architects, if you like, trying to build that in, because that's where it's really cost efficient. But at the end of the day, there may be a decision where you just have to, you're going to take a risk, right? Now, that's obviously not for the CISO to make that decision, but it's the CISO's prerogative to make sure that they advise the business and give the right reflection, realistic and pragmatic type of advice on what could be done to kind of mitigate the chances of that happening in the first place. But ultimately, it is, it flies in the face of itself. It's great to be innovative. You have to keep reinventing the ways. Customers demand more. We all demand more, and therefore you've got to be on your feet thinking of different ways of doing it. So the CISO is no different. There are other services in the whole, just like HR, just like finance. They've got to think about how they can do it differently, more efficient, more effective, ultimately adds to the bottom line.
How do you anticipate, or perhaps it is already, areas like robotic process automation, like any kind of automation technology? How do you see that impacting cybersecurity? Does it help because it maybe eliminates some of the human factor that might be the cause of an awful lot of these errors in the first place, or does it introduce entirely new, areas of kind of uncertainty and potential risk?
Both, because it does. It's a well known that most incidents occur through human error. Again, I think it's over 70%. Unfortunately, you can't remove that risk, because you still need people to drive those processes or those systems or those decisions. So the use of automation, the use of machine learning adds to in terms of efficiency and reduces some of that risk of error. The flip side of that, of course, is as you know, under GDPR, automated decision making or AI contradicts some of your, or infringes on some of your rights as an individual under GDPR. So there's a balance to be had here, and you start getting into the ethical debate. Take an insurance company, for example, that may be using sensors in the house to then work out whether or not they're eligible for a premium based on the level of activity in your house. But that's personally identifiable information that you've got there. And then you've got facial recognition, and the list goes on. And all of this is being, machine learnable. It's basically coding. And we're getting into self-driving cars and all this kind of great stuff, which has a massive ethical debate. But ultimately, they're still vulnerable because they're computers, they're systems, they're software, and therefore they're only as good as the controls you put around them. So it's a fascinating space, but it's not going to go away overnight. It's actually going to get a lot harder.
What are the potential implications from a brand point of view of getting all this stuff wrong?
Okay. Well, obviously huge. I think I'm going to caveat that because I am seeing a change in attitudes. There's much more tolerance, both on a kind of business side and on a consumer side. I think, and that's, I have to say, that's market dependent. So the UK is one of the most mature, if you like, social media and social savvy type countries in Europe, but in the world, along with America and other places. And there seems to be far more just acceptance that actually, stuff happens, bad stuff happens, and some organisations will suffer as a result of that. Naturally, you'd expect some sort of recourse, but actually, I think we're seeing a difference in that, and that's also reflected in the attitudes towards things like cyber risk insurance, because. Yes, there's, you travel on the tube at the moment, and Hiscox are advertising about cybercrime, and how they've obviously got a product to help you deal with that. But I think, and certainly at my last company, we took a risk-based approach to that and decided that actually, yes, we could have a hit of about 50 million. In terms of losses as a direct result of that, and that was a tolerable level of risk that we're willing to accept. And so I think there's much more pragmatism being seen at a board level about more acceptance about, well, yeah, of course stuff happens, and yes, no one wants it to happen, but it's almost slightly inevitable. So we're now in this period where I remember 10, 15 years ago, where it wasn't even called cyber, but we were talking about breaches and incidents and things like that, and we struggled to even get an audience with the board. Now we're on the other side of that. I see it tailing down now, that actually, no, we're prepared to accept that. Now, they might not tell you that, they might not actually verbalise it, but I think that's what's happening, and that's my suspicion. I'd love to do some research on that, but that's for another day.